So, the Gemara that we learned uh, had to do with the law of uh, regarding paraduma, the red heifer, and how they would have their children um, live in this area for a number of years in order for the children to be totally pure from tumas mace and maybe other tumas. And the ultimate goal was that they should be able to prepare the water that was used for sprinkling, the Mei Nida, it's called, or Mei Para, the Mei Chatos, this water that was used for sprinkling on people who were Tamei Mace. It should be done in a most pure way, most separated from any potential of being impure. And the Mishnah that we brought here mentioned that, according to one opinion, the children would sit on top of doors, on top of the oxen. According to the other opinion, they just sat on top of the oxen. And basically, they would have all these
I appointment they have on the 24th is not
all of these avenues all of these methods that they in order to cause that there should be no tumas mace option. They were going to covering themselves from all ends, and they used an area that was down to the bedrock, and then they had arches, and then even then the children had to ride on top of when they went to get the water, so they to the shiloach, so they left that area. They would need to go on oxen, but even the oxen, according to one opinion, they even had to have a board on top of the oxen in order that we'll soon see what the exact reason is, but the concept that we're understanding has to do with the fact they're trying to make oyhels, constantly trying to make tents that would block any impurity from going up and affecting and latching on to these children who are going to draw the water. And ultimately, it would impact the water, which they're going to now mix, which is going to be mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. Now, these children would then take the water and they would travel on these oxen to the Beis Hamikdash and deliver the water over there. We've discussed this pretty much at length, all the different angles of with regard to the fact that are we covering ourselves completely from all types of tumah. And we mentioned yesterday that about Tues over here talks about the fact that they might be tamei with tumas yeledes or tumas nida when they touch their mother. And Tues explained that that's not a tumah hayotze migufan, that's not an impurity that comes from themselves. So we're not exactly protecting ourselves from all of the tumas, but at least from the tumas mace, from the impurity of a dead body, we're protecting the children from, and a tumah that's yotze migufan, a tumah that's internal in their body. That's what we're protecting these children from. And so we tried to we spoke yesterday about another situation where a woman is a kohen's wife, if she's allowed to go to a cemetery if she's pregnant, because there seems to be at least one opinion brought in Shulchan Aruch. It's brought twice really in Shulchan Aruch. It's brought in Yeridea. It's also brought in Arachayim. this opinion of the Rekeach, where the heter of going to a cemetery of a wife of a kohen who's pregnant, that going to a cemetery is because of a sveka. But the question is, happens if she does give birth to this boy? Is the boy tameh? If she does, in other words, what happens in the ultimately when the child is born? If she might be allowed to go into the cemetery, but when the child is born, if the child maybe is tameh tumas meis, and that seemed to be a very apropos question for this Gemara, because we're trying to limit the potential of these children being tamei meis. Now, what's interesting is it says Maviim nashim ubrais v'yoldeis sham. They would bring pregnant women to this place, and they would give birth there. So I guess you could learn that you could learn two ways. You could learn that they brought the women who were about to give birth, the pregnant women who were about to give birth, they would go and give birth there. But you could also learn that they would bring them when they became pregnant. And if so, that would maybe be an answer to this. They maybe were machmir to bring these women when they got pregnant. That they should, just because they're pregnant, not necessarily is that going to remove the potential of the child being tameh inside the womb. According to the Rekeach, this view. Now, we did say that there is another view that says it's balua, the pure child is balua, is clothed. But on the other hand, maybe that doesn't work. Maybe the child, as Ezra mentioned, the child is a limb of the mother. So the question was, does the child become tameh when the mother is pregnant? But it could be that the Gemara means that they would actually bring them there during pregnancy. Knows that they shouldn't become pregnant. In any event, this was the discussion yesterday, so we covered a lot of that discussion. I do want to mention one more thing that is something brought up in Tues, and it does have practical application, and that is the question of using an umbrella on Shabbos. Using an umbrella on Shabbos, how does that have to do with our Gemara? Well, our Gemara talks about the laws of making a tent. And Tues over here mentions about this when the Gemara mentions the case of putting a door on top of the oxen and having children ride on top of that door. So Tues asks, he says, there is an opinion that an oyhel zaruk is not an oyhel. A thrown tent is not a tent. You throw a tent, it's not really a tent, according to one opinion. And if so, Tues is bothered with, if this door is moving with the ox, so is this really considered an oyhel that it's going to block any tumah that's under it? Now, Tues says, well, you could say that the opinion that an oyhel zaruk is not called an oyhel, that a tent that's thrown, which means moving, a moving tent is not a tent. You could say that follows the other view. The other view is they didn't use doors. What did they use? They had the children ride on the backs of the oxen. Now, that they also are moving. The oxen are traveling to the Shiloach spring, to the water of the Shiloach to get water. So they are moving. But there you could say that is not considered an oyhel zaruk, because there you actually have a pasuk that says that the body is considered an oyhel, because it says atzamais v'gidim t'seichacheni. There's a pasuk that basically says that the body is considered an oyhel. The bones, the gidim, sinews. These are considered a schach. They're considered a protection, and basically they are considered a tent. So Tosfos says that maybe you could answer that the oxen are considered an oihel, even though they're moving. And the opinion that says that an oihel zaruk, that a tent that is thrown, is not considered a tent, that opinion follows the view that they only did the oxen, they didn't actually do the door on top of it. But Tosfos says, but that doesn't really fit with Rabbi Elazar, that he basically he doesn't use that pasuk about the oxen. He says, what are you going to do? The oxen would move. If you don't follow that understanding, then the oxen, even if according to the opinion that they didn't use doors, but they used the oxen, nevertheless, the oxen are moving. That would be called an oihel zaruk. So how did it help sitting on top of these oxen in order to get the water? If the oxen are moving, is that really considered an oihel, a tent? So this is Tosfos deals with this issue, and he basically leaves it with a question. And so when it comes to when it comes on Shabbos, with regard to a umbrella, so there's a famous shuvah from the Noida B'Yehuda, where someone sent a letter to the Noida B'Yehuda, which basically had two views in it. It said, I hold that it's usher, but this big rabbi wrote me letters proving that it should be permissible. And he says, I would like to ask your opinion. What do you hold? They asked the famous Yechezkel Landau, the Noida B'Yehuda. They asked him what he holds. Does he hold that an umbrella on Shabbos is allowed? Now, what's why is it connected to our Gemara? Because there's room to say that maybe when you're carrying the umbrella, you're moving it. If you're moving the umbrella, if you stay in one place, maybe that could be a problem. But since the umbrella is being moved, it's called an oihel zaruk. It could be considered like a thrown tent, and maybe that's not going to be an oil. An oihel zaruk is not an oil, it's not a real tent, and so you can't say that you're over. What's the prohibition of a umbrella? It's creating a tent, it's creating an oil. But if it's moving, there's room to say that maybe that's not a problem. An oihel zaruk is possibly not an oil. So the Noida B'Yehuda says that he's not comfortable with that claim. He says he brings the Tosfos that we just spoke out, and he says that by the oxen, an ox is considered that it's an oihel even if it moves. So he says, since the oxen are considered oihels even if they move, so he says, therefore, the same law would apply to a human who's moving. Now, he says, so when you're holding that umbrella, it should also be considered that, in other words, since you yourself are considered an oihel, so the umbrella as well will be considered an oihel. The umbrella could also be considered an oihel. He says, why? So he says that there's a Tosfos in Eruvin. He says that explains that the doors are also considered oihels because they're placed on top of the oxen, a little different than our Tues. And the Tues, based on the Tues in Eruvin, he says if you have doors that are on top of oxen, and the ox is considered an oihel even though it's moving, so then the doors as well are considered oihels even though they're moving. He says, if so, he brings the question from Taisvis, I should say, about the doors, and he says the Rashba answers it. Okay, maybe Taisvis doesn't answer this in Eruvin, but the Rashba answers it, that since they're on top of the oxen, it's considered like they're also considered a noihel. They also have a law of a noihel, says. So if so, when you carry the umbrella and you're holding it, so since the person is called a noihel and he's moving and it's still considered a noihel, so it doesn't, the fact that the umbrella is moving with him and the umbrella is an entity and it's moving, it's not going to remove the law of oyel. It doesn't ruin the law of oyel. It's still considered a tent. And therefore, you would not be allowed to use an umbrella on Shabbos. So basically, our Gemara could be a source, at least the discussion in our Gemara could be a source that an umbrella, even though it's moving, is considered an oyel, considered a tent. Now, he does bring that the Chassam Sofer and some other poskim want to permit it and say it's really allowed. It's not really a tent. There's other reasons why it's not a problem. But the conclusion is that it's considered uvdin dechoil. It's considered weekday activity to carry an umbrella, and it became customary not to use umbrellas. So even though there are leniencies about umbrellas, but the poskim don't seem to follow them, and therefore a person should not use an umbrella on Shabbos, even if they have an Eruv in their area, because of this issue, or because of the issue, I should say, of it not being Shabbosdik. It's not appropriate for Shabbos. But the fact that the oyel could be considered an oyel, that there are poskim. The Noda B'Yehuda seems to hold that it's considered it could be considered a tent. Not everyone agrees with that, but they have other reasons why an umbrella would be a problem, even if you have an Eruv. Yes, Moshe.
What about a hood? What about a hood? Somebody who wears a hood over there.
So a hood is different. The hood is it should be close to your body. It's not like there's a large empty space that makes it a hood over the ground. It's not like protecting, you know what I mean, a large area. An umbrella there's a lot of empty space there that makes it more of an oyel. The hood is considered also batel to the person, so it's nullified to the person. Wouldn't be considered an oyel. Yes, Yehuda.
Yeah, with the umbrella, when you're stopping to cross the street, that you're
that could be a problem,
right?
That would also be a problem because then you're considered an oyel. Would you be obligated to keep on moving, or if you're considered right? It could be. Well, I'm not sure. You have to really get into the nitty gritty rules if that itself would make a problem, because your intent is to continue walking, with it. So maybe that
run over by a car. Yes,
your intent is to continue walking with it. You don't have an intent to stop there to give yourself you know what I mean. So would that help to make it considered that it's traveling? It's still considered traveling. Maybe I don't know. I have to think about it. You have to know the laws of Shabbos well for that. But it's a good point, Yehuda. Yes, Victor.
What about the actual opening the umbrella from, how an umbrella, usually it folds into a little whatever,
right.
And then what about the actual opening itself?
Opening of it. So it could be that the way they're understanding it is that it was open. See, I don't know how it was in the olden days. It could be the discussion was that in those days, they didn't have the mechanisms that we have now. So it probably was opened already. You just carried it with you,
Uh-huh.
So that was the question of making a tent of where that's what it would seem to me. Or maybe they're saying that since you're opening it and moving right away, maybe that should permit it. You know what I mean? That may be the fact that it's never really an oihel because if you move it right away. Maybe that was the question. The question was, what happens if you immediately go with it? Shouldn't that be permissible? Maybe something along those lines.
Also, I heard this before. I don't know if you could tell me where it might come from, Rabbi. It's certain hats with a very wide brim that, let's
They
say,
could be an
between the
oihel.
brim and your shoulders, there's like, there's going to be more than a tefach.
Right.
So
that could be problematic. The brim, if it's more than a tefach, more than a handbreadth. So that's, it depends on how wide it is. But it's also, if it goes up, you take that into consideration that it's not flat, the tefach. You know what I mean? If it goes up, then it lessens the tefach. You know what I mean? Our hats, they're not flat. They go up. So I don't know if you would measure that by inches. The fact that it goes up, I would think that it goes by the distance of the end of it to the beginning of it without measuring it exactly along the slope of it. You know what I mean? So I don't think the slope is counted. And so, especially nowadays, we don't have this problem because now the latest custom is to have the most tiniest brim that you could ever imagine. The latest. But I remember, 25, maybe 35 years ago when the brims were, the bigger the brim, the more fancy the hat was, the more it looked cool. But now it's now that the tradition is the opposite, so it's not so applicable. But I'm sure we could look it up. I'm sure it's discussed, like in the laws of Shabbos, and the later poskim probably talk about it. So I'll try to take a look and see what they say about that. I remember it being a discussion. I don't remember what the final. Going back, I remember going back like 35 years when they had this discussion about the brims, if that was an issue, but I don't remember what the final conclusion was. Yes, Jeffrey.
So the other issue is what about Yom Tov? Because Shabbos, many of us grew up in places that there's no roof, so there was
but it's the same thing. Oil, you can't make a tent.
So that's the question. If it isn't considered to be a tent, then on Yom Tov it would be different from Shabbos.
You mean even if there's no right? Even if in a place where there's no eruv, then the applicable law the law would apply for Yom Tov, right? Okay, good point.
I knew some people who said that they opened the
umbrella before Shabbos,
and then they just put it in a place that was big enough for it, like in the vestibule of the house, and then they took it open.
Right. So what it seems like from these poskim and what we saw was a Chassam Sofer, and it's brought from other poskim, that it doesn't seem appropriate for Shabbos, even if it's permissible. I haven't seen in the shuls in the North Miami Beach area that people use umbrellas. I don't know if there's any areas where people are lenient. People are lenient over here to use scooters on Shabbos. That's another discussion. The non-battery operated scooters. A lot of people who seem to want to use the scooters on Shabbos. That's a topic of discussion, of course, because that doesn't seem to be too Shabbos-stick either. But the umbrella seems to be accepted. Not to use the umbrella seems to be the accepted custom. But as we see, there seems to be a discussion in halacha if there's even room to permit it, or would it be considered an oihel? And even though it's moving, it could still, as we see in our Gemara, there's room to say that it's still considered an oihel. It's still considered a tent, and that would be problematic on Shabbos or Yom Tov.
I've heard the Ben Ish Chai even talks about a regular, like a bicycle, even that some people are lenient if they're with a regular
bicycle would be similar to would be
scooter,
similar to the scooter. The only difference maybe is that a bicycle is really used to go outside of the tchum. So it's a kli shemalachtoi liyiser, which doesn't really make that much of a difference, but it's used more for prohibited traveling, a bicycle. A scooter is rarely used, a non-electric scooter is rarely used to go outside of the tchum, I think. So that might be a reason why a scooter might be a little more lenient. But at the same time, I mean, it doesn't really change much. That's a law of muktzah, which wouldn't apply because you're using the bicycle for local, So the bottom line is that all of these things are the main prohibition. Of course, people come up with prohibitions because the tire might get flat and then you'll need to fix it. It's a prohibition of fixing. And there's there's different reasons why it might be problematic, a bicycle, but the main reason seems to be that it's not Shabbosdik. It's called uvdin dechoil, and I think that is really the law that overrides, the reason that really overrides all of these other laws is that it's not Shabbosdik. But they do give reasons. The different poskim do give reasons that a bicycle should be even usher because of tikkun kli, I know, is one of them, and there must be some others as well about riding a bicycle on Shabbos here. Riding bicycle on Shabbos.
With the umbrella, the problem is also one of Maratayim, someone who know the laws. Okay, might see someone who does know the laws and either prepared the umbrella before Shabbat and knows this entire thing about the ohel, etc. But someone who doesn't would see a frum person carrying an umbrella on Shabbat and would say, "Oh, it's permissible," and so therefore he would not know all the intricacies, the ins and outs of such a situation, and he might come to open up his umbrella on Shabbat, carry it to shul, and then close it on Shabbat, thinking that he could do all those things, when in reality he couldn't. So I think that might have been part of the reasons why they would not allow an umbrella
on Shabbos. Okay, so that's an interesting question because I'm not 100% sure that it would apply. Opening an umbrella, would that be a d'oraisa or a d'rabbanan? Possibly it would only be a rabbinic law in the first place because it's so temporary. I have to look up in Shulchan Aruch again about the laws of oihel. Is a temporary oihel, an umbrella would definitely be like a temporary tent. Would that be rabbinic? If that's rabbinic, then I don't know if they, I don't know how far we would take the Marcheshvan law.
Victor just brought up the fact of boneh, the fact that you're building something because the umbrella was not, you're actually building something.
Right, but it's a temporary thing. I'm not convinced that it would be d'oraisa. I'd have to look it up. It might be. But I don't. I guess we could look up and see if they do mention the Marcheshvan thing. That's definitely a good question. I'm just not sure if that law would apply. Anyway, regarding the bicycle, so of course one of the issues of a bicycle is considered carrying. So riding on a bike is considered like carrying. So that would be a problem if there's no
if there's an Eruv. Let's say there's an Eruv.
But if there's an Eruv, that would be you could get around that. Then the problem would be if the bicycle breaks down, chain falls off. So there's concern that the rider might go and fix it. And I think the main issue really is that it's considered a mundane activity, and that's really the icing on the real the main reason I think that would apply. But in any event, we got some interesting questions about the umbrella, so I have to look into all the different discussions that we had. Anyway, getting back to our Gemara. Okay, so we learned all about these laws of Oyhel. We're now almost experts in the laws of Oyhel, and now comes the Gemara's question. But Tanya, We are on page 21a, Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, 21a, and we are up to the last word on the line, Vitanya, which is about maybe 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. And we learned in a brisa. So we have the Mishnah about the paraduma, and then there's a brisa about the same topic, the same discussion. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Rabbi Yehuda says, they would not bring the children on top of these doors that were on top of the oxen. Rather, they would just sit them on the shvarim. El shvarim, they would just have the oxen. And that would basically be the way that they brought the children to get the water. They would bring them on top of the oxen. The oxen themselves were considered oihels because their stomach and they were very large oxen, and they would be like a oihel. If you think of the ox as almost like a tent, so it blocked any impurity that was below it. So you didn't need the tents. You would have the oxen themselves that would be considered like an oil, like a tent, and even without the doors, that the other opinion said you had to use doors. The oxen himself is good enough, and that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion brought in the brisa. Now the Gemara asks, "V'hashvarim, the oxen, the oil she'enoi asui b'dei adamu." The oxen is a tent that is not a tent made by man; it's a natural tent. And Uktani, and we just learned, it was just taught, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, that they didn't bring the doors, they would bring these shvarim, which basically means that you could have a tent even though it's not made by man. What's the problem with a tent that's not made by man? So we just had Rabbi Yehuda's view above that he learned a gzeira shava, two words that are similar from the laws of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, where it says over there that a tent has to be similar to the tabernacle, and the tabernacle Moshe put on the person put on the covering. It was made by man. So here also the laws of Oyel, we know, have to be made by man according to Rabbi Yehuda. And because he learns this Gzeira Shava, he has this teaching. And how does Rabbi Yehuda himself learn when it comes to the laws of Paraduma that the children would be using a natural tent as an oil? If Rabbi Yehuda himself holds that that's not a valid oil, it's not a valid tent. It has to be handmade. You have to make it by hand. You have to intentionally make an oil. It has to be done by a bidei adam. In fact, if you remember on page 20b, we learned over there about the laws of oil. We talked about water causing there to be an area, an open area. The water, the animals dug a hole. The water dug into made an empty space there, or if there was empty space done unintentionally. All of these, Rabbi Yehuda says it's not considered a tent. So how is Rabbi Yehuda going to hold over here that the children would be on top of the oxen, and that's going to be considered a tent? So the Gemara answers, Ella. The Gemara answers, Ki Asar Rav Dimi Amar Rebbe Lazar Moide Rabbi Yehuda Kamali Yagrod. So the Gemara says that when Rav Dimi came, said in the name of Rabbi Elazar that you could answer this problem that Rabbi Yehuda holds. Normally, you need to intend to make a tent, but if something is very large, the size of an egg rice, which is the the fist of a person, of a large person. The source he brings is from basically the size of a head of a person. That is that size is going to be an oihel no matter what. The size that we mentioned, that we normally follow, which is a tefach, a handbreadth, that is the size of a regular. That's the regular size, and for that you need to intend to make an oil. But something has the space of an mole egroif, the full fist, which we're explaining means the fist of a large person. We have other sources for such laws. Rashi brings in other cases where you have such a measurement, mole egroif. It's referring to the egroif of someone by the name of Ben Avtiach, which was large, like the head of a person, and of an adult. So when it's that size, it's not a problem to be an oihel, even if it's not intentionally made. And so that's the answer that the Gemara gives. And the Gemara says, and we also have a brisa. Tanya nami hachi. We also have a brisa. Moide Rabbi Yehuda b'shtifin uvenekike hasloim. That Rabbi Yehuda agrees that the when you have shkifin, which is an area that a rock fell out from, and it's like on a mountain, a rock fell out and it created an empty space. So Rabbi Yehuda agrees that that could be considered an oihel. Uvenekike hasloim, and when there's holes, cracks in these rocks, that these are called tents, even though they're not made by man. How does a rock fall out of a mountain, or the rock, the cracks in the rock? It's not made by man. It's some type of hurricane or some type of however things erupt and cause the rock falls, and ultimately, so there's a gap of space, and even though it's not man-made, they are considered to be an oyel because they are very large. They're considered to be a tent because they're the size of a mole egroif. They're the size of a fist. They're considered large, and that's considered good enough to be a tent. Now, this is the brisa. It also seems to confirm this answer that Rabbi Yehuda agrees. Okay, so we bottom line is that Rabbi Yehuda holds that if there is a tent that is large, even if it's not man-made, with the intention of having a tent, it's called a tent. Okay, now the Gemara asks, V'harei delas. Now, what about the door? The yesh ba kama egroifin, the door that has many fists. Ukatani Rabbi Yehuda lo'hayu mavian dalsais ela shvarim. And Rabbi Yehuda said that they didn't use doors; they would use the oxen. Now, why is Rabbi Yehuda making such a big deal? They use oxen, they use the doors. The fact is that the doors have many. You're going to tell me the door is not, you want to tell me the door is not intended, is not man-made? It is actually man-made, because the person put the door on in order for the children not to get tameh, because he wants to make an oil. So it's actually made with the intention that there shouldn't be a tent. There shouldn't be any. That there should be a tent there. He wants there to be a tent there. It's actually man-made, and it even has many egg rifes. It even has many fists, much more than a tevach, handbreadth. So why is Rabbi Yehuda making a big deal out of this not using a door and specifically using the oxen themselves.
Were the doors made for that specific purpose from the beginning?
So the door itself, however the door was built, we don't know where the door came from. So not necessarily was the door built that way, but the usage of the door was made for this purpose. They're attaching it to the oxen, and the purpose is to make a tent. That's why the other opinion, at least that would be the logic behind it, that they want to make a tent, and that it shouldn't be tamei, that the children shouldn't be tamei, and so it seemed like that's the goal. Now, the exact way of explaining the Gemara's question and understanding the depth of it is a little complicated over here. There's Rashi's explanation, Tosfos, even Rashi, and both of them, there's commentaries that try to explain exactly what they mean. On a very simple level, we're just trying to figure out why is Rabbi Yehuda so concerned about, like, it doesn't seem like it should make a difference, the oxen or the doors. But if you want to know specifically how Rashi is learning this, so he says, you could look inside the Rashi, and I'll show you how it's a little vague. It's 6 lines from the bottom. He says, "V'ka'amar Reb Yehuda, lo'hayu mevi'in dalsa." So Reb Yehuda said they would not bring these doors, rather they would bring shvarim. So Rashi says, "Kosalka daite mishum di ein derech oyel b'kan." What the Gemara is assuming is that the problem with the doors is that the doors, it's not normal to make a tent out of a door. You don't normally make a tent from like this type of a tent. That's not the normal way to make a tent. And it's not the derech of an oil. And therefore, it's not a kosher oil. And then the Rashi adds in the kol shkein shvarim. And if that's so, then for sure the oxen should have the same problem as the doors. So what does that mean? That the door was actually made by man with the intention to be an oil, but nevertheless, and it even has many fists, but nevertheless, it's not considered an oil. Why? Because it's not the derech. So if that's so even oxen should should also be the same thing. It's not the derech. It's not the way. Why are the oxen considered to be an oil, according to Rabbi Yehuda? So this is like a little more fully explain the question. In other words, you could sort of get away with just learning the Gemara a little more surface level. What's the difference according to Rabbi Yehuda, the door, the oxen? But the actual way Rashi is learning it is that it's if the door is not good, so for sure the oxen shouldn't be good. That's the way Rashi is learning this question. Now, the Gemara answers. Amar Abaye, loy hutzrachu lahavi dalsis. No. You got it all wrong. It's not that a door is not kosher. It's not that a door is not an oil. It's not that a door is not going to be an oil because of what you thought, that it's not the derech, it's not the normal way of making a tent with a door. That's not the problem. All Rabbi Yehuda is saying is you don't need to bring doors. You could, but you don't need to. It's kosher. The door is okay if you want to do it. It's an oil. We have no problem. It's not an issue that it's not the derech. And therefore, a door works and the shvarim work, the oxen. And you could use whichever one you want. In Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is understood. The oxen are kosher for an oil. It's considered a proper oil because even though they're not man-made, nevertheless, they are many agroifim. They're very large oxen. And and therefore it's considered an oil. It's a tent, and the doors would also be a tent, even though maybe it's not the derech. It doesn't matter. The doors are considered an oil. It's made by man. It's with the intention to be an oil, and it's very large. It's kosher. It's 100% fine. That's Abaye's explanation. Rava Amar Hayom V'Andalsis Kolikar. That there was a different reason why he didn't want them to use doors, and it's not because the door is not an oil. It's a different reason. They didn't bring doors because ikar at all. Because if he's sitting on top of a door, guess what? The door is attached to the oxen. The oxen is the back of the oxen is a little roundish. It's not exactly the most flat, sturdy type of thing. But when you have the door attached to that, and the door is a flat piece of wood, so that actually is going to cause the child to feel like he's inside he's on a very sturdy type of a structure. Maybe, I don't know if they put shock absorbers or something, but he somehow felt a little more sturdy. And guess what we're nervous of? Shema Yotzi Roishai. Maybe he's going to stick out his head, or one of his limbs, and he'll become tamei. So the child's das is gasa. It's coarse on him. It's big. He's happy. He's comfortable. He feels comfortable there. He feels able to. He's not nervous. He's relaxed. The daito shaltinuk is gasa olive, and we're afraid he's going to start getting curious. Let him start walking around. He's on the deck of the ship. He's fine. He's on top of this board. He feels like let me check things out. And he's going to stick his head over. And what's going to happen if he sticks his head over, or if he sticks one of his limbs over? What happens then? He could become tamei. If he's on top of the door, he's not going to be tamei. Why not? Because the door is an oil. It blocks the tumah from penetrating him. But if he's comfortable on top of that door, he might stick his head over it. If he sticks his head over, then he's going to actually become tamei. He has no more tent except his own body. It will be the tent. He will actually become tamei on top of, be a tent on top of something that a dead body or corpse or a piece of a corpse, a kazayas of a corpse, or revius of blood, or whatever might be buried under. He could be coming tamei, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda does not want. He says they did not use doors because the child will be too comfortable. But if he sits on the back of a ox, doesn't feel so safe unless he holds on tight. So he's not going to lean over. So that is the issue. The issue is Shema Yotzi Roishai. He might stick his head out, Oy Echad Me'ivarav, or one of his limbs, V'yatame, and become tamei, Bekever Hatahaim. Next page, 21b. Bekever Hatahaim will be tamei. With Kever Hatahaim just means a grave that is unknown. Tahaim literally means the depths, but it means a suffix kever. Rashi says it means. It's a term used, kever hatahaim, which means a potential that might be a grave that's we're not aware of, and that would be the reason not to use doors. Instead, to use just sit on top of the back of the oxen. Now, the other opinion felt that you should use doors. So, what's the reason of the other opinion? So one of the explanations of the other opinion is that doors were actually better because when you're on top of the back of an oxen, he might stick out his legs, and then his legs will become tamei. Or if he's on top of a door, there's no space. In other words, the door is much larger. If he stretches himself out, he's still not going to be outside of the space of the door. He's not. But if he moves around, then maybe he could walk over and bend over. But if he's just stretches himself, so that would be the other way of looking at it. That maybe it's better to have a door. He doesn't stretch out his legs, even though he's only 7 years old or 8 years old. but maybe he's a big kid, and somehow maybe his legs is gonna stretch them out. And now these were very large shvarim, but I guess there's something to be concerned about. So there you have these two opinions: if you should use a door or use specifically not use a door and just sit on top of the back of the oxen. Tanya Kabasei de Rava, we have a brisa that follows this explanation of Rava, why Rabbi Yehuda did not want to use. He says they did not use doors. The reason why they didn't use doors follows the same way of Rava's thinking, Rava's line of thinking. Rabbi Yehuda says, they would not bring doors at all, because the das of a tinaik, which means that the child's feeling will be gasa olav, will be there must be a better way of translating it than I'm translating it, but literally it means it'll be large on him, coarse on him. He'll be too comfortable. I don't know if any of you have the English, want to give me a better wording over there. But the daite shel tinaik is gasa olav, is he'll feel too comfortable, and then Shema Yosi Roisha Yayachad Meivara V'Yatame Bekever Atohim. And so it basically says the same exact reason as Rava mentioned, that maybe he's going to stick his head out or one of his limbs, and he'll become tamei with the kever, with a kever hatohim, with an unknown grave, because he sticks his head out and he no longer has the door to be a chatzitza to block the tumah, and to be an oyel, to be a tent that blocks the tumah. Instead, he'll actually bend him. He'll actually receive the impurity because he stuck his body out over the door.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
A kever of a non-Jew does not produce tumah. Okay. That's the first thing. Second thing is, Jews normally, when they bury people in particular plots. How can we then make an assumption that there's a kever at home of a Jew on the way to the Shiloh? Because Jews don't bury other Jews stam by the side of the road.
So first of all, your first assumption is actually an argument between Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jewry, which originally started with the Machlekes Tanoim, and it basically ends off being a Machlekes Rambam and Shulchan Aruch. And the Rambam, in truth, is Rashi seems to say the same thing in Chumash, that Adam kiyamas ba'oyel, Adam atem kriyan Adam, that only a Jew is called an Adam, and the guy is not called an Adam. So it ends up that as you're being Sephardic, so you're correct that the Sephardic people hold that a non-Jew is not mitame ba'oyel. A non-Jew is tame by touching or by moving, but not by carrying, but not by being an oyel, not by a tent. According to Ashkenazic Paiskim, which is the Ramah, a non-Jew is tamei by oil, also, not only by touching and by carrying, moving, but also by oil. So it's not so simple that a non-Jew is not matami. It's a machlekes in the Gemara and the Mishnah, and it ends up being machlekes who the paskin like. Now, the fact that it's not allowed to be buried, a person is not. Jewish people don't bury near water, without putting a mark there, without this. We're not saying what's the appropriate way to bury. We're just concerned that there might be some by some chance that somehow someone was buried there. So we don't know. We don't think there is, but the problem is we want to cover ourselves from all options. Is it possible something happened that we didn't know about, that someone who didn't know the halacha, someone was buried, someone ended up being hidden there by a non-Jew? we can't. It's impossible just because that's the law. It doesn't mean that no one ever transgressed the rules, and it's possible that someone's buried somewhere and we don't know about it, and that's why we're being extra careful. But you're right. There's a mitzvah to put a stone where someone's buried. There's a and obviously and Jewish people wouldn't bury you. It's not customary to bury by water, although it is surprising. I here in Florida you have there's one cemetery that's actually built on top of it's top of a well, which is really problematic. I once went to a funeral there, and the whole grave was filled with water, and I wasn't the rabbi running the funeral, and there were other rabbis who were greater than me over there, but I don't, I don't really know how they were allowed to even bury in that scenario, but officially, it doesn't seem to me like that would be allowed even according to Jewish law. So here, we're concerned that the someone might be buried near the water, or at least here it would be on the way to the water in Yerushalayim. I don't know if Yerushalayim is light. Does it say you? I'm not exactly sure all the laws about burial. What specific law were you referring to, Ezra? That they wouldn't be allowed to be buried on the side of the road. That's what you mentioned. That they're not allowed to be buried on the side of the road. I'm not exactly familiar with that law, because they're if someone dies there, they're not allowed to be buried right there. Is that a clear law? I thought I think there's some rule that a mace that a mace could be buried anywhere. So I'm not exactly sure of the specific law you're quoting, but there's definitely a mitzvah to put a monument where someone is buried and so on. In any event, the fact is that it's always a suffix. And because of the suffix, because it's a doubt, we're trying to cover ourselves. But it's not like we assume there's it's not like we're sure there's anyone there. We think that it makes sense that someone would be buried there. In any event, this is a brisa that tells us the explanation of Rabbi Yehuda's the reasoning, and the brisa continues, and it says, instead of using a door which was placed on top of the oxen, it says Elam avian shvarim hamitzriyim. They would specifically use Egyptian oxen, shekreisoisein rechavos, that their stomachs were wide, real fat animals. Vatinoikos yoshvin al gabehen, and the reason he says that is because that even if they stick out their legs, it shouldn't end up. Their legs should not reach beyond the back of the oxen, because they would specifically buy shvarim and mitzrayim, the Egyptian ones that were very large, and there was no issue of in other words, he's trying to protect himself against the problem of what happens if they stretch their legs out and they reach over beyond the body of the oxen. Would there be a problem of oil, that there's no more oil to block the tumah, the impurity that's possibly there? And so they would specifically use Egyptian ones that were kreisei and rechavos, very wide stomachs. The children would sit on their backs, and they would have these stoneware cups in their hands, and they would go to the higuyu l'shiloyach. They would go to this spring of water called the Shiloyach spring, Yardu. They went down there, umilum, and they filled up the stoneware. The nose, they would go down from the oxen, and they would fill it up, umilum va'olu, and then they would go back up, v'yoshvu lehen al gabeim, and sit back on top of the backs of the oxen. Okay, so that's the end of that brisa.